It's a beautiful, crisp autumn morning and the ideal opportunity to go and do a little bit of foraging. But today I'm not looking for things to eat, but actually things to dye with. So on my morning walk, I am going to just take you along the hedgerow on this footpath, and we're going to see how many plants we can find that you can dye with. My name's Becca and I'm a fibre artist living in West Wales, and you're very welcome on my morning walk. It's hard to believe that just a few days ago you couldn't even see the mountain. And then today it looks like the south of France. Wow, Pembrokeshire at its very best. Our first source of dye is gorse, and there is actually a short video on the channel where I show you dyeing with gorse flowers. They grow in abundance around here and they give a lovely yellow, as you might imagine looking at the flowers. So the gorse was not only used as a dye plant, it was also used as a forage plant, which seems very unlikely because it's very, very prickly. But what they used to do was cut it and then put it through a gorse mill, which basically were quernstones, and sort of flatten it out, and then it was all right for cattle to eat. It was also collected particularly by women and used as a firelighter, sort of tied up in what they called faggots. And it's basically a bundle and was used for lighting fires. So it's also a very important bee plant because it's just about the only thing that's in flower sort of in January. And so on a warm day when honeybees are out on what's called cleansing flights, which I have to tell you just means they're having a poop, they can actually collect a bit of nectar and some pollen early on in the season when there's pretty much nothing else out. So very interesting plant, kind of seen as a bit of a weed really. It can be dangerous if you don't cut it back on a regular basis, then it can of course catch fire, and we a couple of years ago had quite a lot of gorse fires. So it is important to be maintaining it, and certainly they do that around here. So that is number one, our gorse flower, but we're going to walk on a little bit further and see what else we can see. So our next one is ivy and produces a very pale, pretty green. The berries also are good for dye stuff. It's poisonous, so if you are dyeing in your kitchen, just be a little bit careful. But it's a nice one, and the mordant you need for that is alum. It doesn't need anything particularly fancy. So there you go, there's another plant. Oak. Oak is another excellent dye plant because it contains a lot of tannin, and it means you can actually dye without a mordant because the tannin acts as a mordant. You can also use iron to change it so you get some really good colours. And the leaves and oak galls and the acorns all work really, really well. I never cut oak. I find you just look down and you can pick up the leaves and the acorns without actually having to cut into the trees. I don't mind cutting back on a footpath because the council's going to cut it back anyway. But oak, I don't know, somehow I feel I can just pick up the leaves. I don't actually need to cut them off. So there you go, that's the path we're going down. And as you can see, it's still a beautiful day. I don't know whether you can make that out, but that is what's left of the sloes. I picked them a little bit earlier in the year to make sloe gin. They also make a really pretty dusky pink dye for which you don't need a mordant. They're pretty high in tannins, which is why they will dye without a mordant. So I know I was saying earlier about gorse fires. There you go. That is the result of a gorse fire. This one looks like it was not set deliberately, because what happens is you get glass bottles and sort of rubbish end up on the side of the footpaths, and the sun shines into them and you can actually get them causing a fire. So there you go. This one looks like it didn't travel very far down the hedge, but it is something to be aware of when you live in an area that's full of gorse, and where we are, we back onto gorse, and we sort of do have a route to get out if the gorse ever went up. You do have to think about it. I mean, not a lot, but we have thought about it. So just down here, and I'm not sure how well you can see that, that's heather or ling. No, that's the dog, but this is heather or ling, and you get a sort of a greeny yellow from that. It's quite pretty. So that's another one for you. So I just love this gatepost, 1789, and it probably was standing there a lot longer than that. I mean, nothing to do with dyeing, I just thought I'd share it because I love it. Okay, let's do a bit of walking and talking. I thought when I was walking along here, the first thing that we would come across would be lichen, which of course is a very good dye on wool. Again, just think about when you're collecting it. I never collect it off trees, I collect it when it's fallen on the ground, which in a high wind happens all the time. I thought there'd be a lot more along here. So we're just gonna, gosh, sorry, I'm out of breath, it's quite hilly. I'm gonna walk up here and see if I can find some to show you. So I'll turn this off and go a bit further up the track and see if we can find any. So there you go, that's what I was looking for. Lichen, don't pick it off the trees. It falls on the ground all the time, particularly after a high wind, so pick it up off the ground. An absolute classic, nettles. And this time of the year, probably the roots are going to be better than the leaves because they are sort of going over a bit. If you are of a certain vintage, you probably will remember a TV programme called The Good Life, and Barbara and Tom did some natural dyeing and they used nettles to do that with. So I definitely am showing my age. It's a great plant, nettles. I've got a fabulous book, 101 Uses for Stinging Nettles. And that definitely is still in print. I'm sure it's still in print. I'll link it below. There you go, so that's another one for you. Last few blackberries. Makes very pretty pink. It is not particularly fast, particularly from light, so it does fade quite quickly. So although it does make a dye, I think better to make blackberry apple crumble or a nice jam or jelly. Okay, our next plant is sorrel. And sorrel and dock all produce a colour. And I'm just going to turn you around and tell you a story about that. Okay, so if you are using dock or sorrel or any of those for dyeing, be a little bit cautious. They contain oxalic acid, which is toxic to humans and to dogs. The last time I did some dyeing with dock leaves, I put the remains of the dock on my compost heap, sort of in a big wet squidgy ball, and the dog raced up behind me and clambered up the compost heap and ate the big wet soggy clump all in one gulp. 125 pounds later and a trip to the vet, she was fine. But just be a little bit cautious, because although probably because it was cooked it wouldn't actually have done her any harm, I didn't want to take the risk. So just when you are disposing of what's left of your dye bath, if it's something that's potentially toxic, make sure the dog can't get it. I mean, maybe it's just my daft dog, but you know, just always be a little bit cautious when you are working with materials that are potentially dangerous. So there you go. End of lecture. As I was out and about, I thought I'd share a few dye plants that you can commonly find sort of just out on a walk. They're not particularly rare. I mean, I don't pick rare plants anyway. And if it's on the edge of a road or the edge of a footpath where the council's going to cut anyway, I really don't think there's a huge problem with cutting a little bit for your dyeing projects. Now, I will be back a little bit later in the week with the full podcast, and I'm going to look at spinning in the fold and also update you on the projects I'm working in. So until then, happy creating, and I'll see you very soon.